Section 50 of A Popular History of France, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathy Barrett. A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, Volume 4, by François Guizot. Translated by Robert Black. Chapter 34. Henry III and the Religious Wars, 1574 to 1589. Part 5. It is said that, on hearing of the Duke of Guise's sudden arrival at Paris, Pope Sixtus V. exclaimed, "Ah, what rashness, to thus go and put himself in the hands of a prince he has so outraged!" And some days afterwards, on the news that the king had received the Duke of Guise and nothing had come of it, "Ah, dastard prince, poor creature of a prince, to have let such a chance escape him of getting rid of a man who seems born to be his destruction." When the king was gone, Guise acted the master in Paris. He ordered the immediate delivery into his hands of the Bastille, the Arsenal, and the castle of Vincennes. Ornano, governor of the Bastille, sent an offer to the king, who had arrived at Chartres, to defend it to the last extremity. "I will not expose to so certain a peril a brave man who may be necessary to me elsewhere," replied the king. Guise caused to be elected at Paris a new town council and a new provost of tradesmen, all taken from amongst the most ardent Leaguers. He at the same time exerted himself to restore order. He allowed all royalists who wished to depart to withdraw to Chartres. He went in person and pressed the premier president of Parliament, Achille de Harlay, to resume the course of justice. "It is great pity, sir," said Harlay, "when the servant drives out the master. This assembly is founded (seated) on the fleur de lis; being established by the king, it can act only for his service. We will all lose our lives to a man rather than give way a whit to the contrary." "I have been in many battles," said Guise as he went out, "in assaults and encounters the most dangerous in the world, and I have never been so overcome as at my reception by this personage." At the same time that he was trying to exercise authority and restore order, unbridled violence and anarchy were making head around him. The 16 and their friends discharged from the smallest offices, civil or religious, whoever was not devoted to them. They changed all the captains and district officers of the city militia. They deposed all the incumbents, all the ecclesiastics whom they termed Huguenots and policists. The pulpits of Christians became the platforms of demagogues. The preachers Guiticestre, Boucher, Rose, John Prévost, Aubry, Piganat, Cuilly, Peltier, and a host of others, whose names have fallen into complete obscurity, were the popular apostles, the real firebrands of the troubles of the League, says Pasquier. There was scarcely a chapel where there were not several sermons a day. "You know not your strength," they kept repeating to their auditors. "Paris knows not what she is worth; she has wealth enough to make war upon 4 kings. France is sick, and she will never recover from that sickness till she has a draught of French blood given her. If you receive Henry de Valois into your towns, make up your minds to see your preachers massacred, your sheriffs hanged, your women violated, and the gibbets garnished with your members." One of these raving orators, Claude Trahy, provincial of the Cordeliers, devoted himself to hounding on the populace of Auxerre against their bishop, James Amyot, the translator of Plutarch, whom he reproached with "having communicated with Henry III. And administered to him the Eucharist." Brother John Moressin, one of Trahy's subalterns, went about brandishing a halbert in the public place at Auxerre and shouting, "Courage, lads! Messire Amyot is a wicked man, worse than Henry de Valois. He has threatened to have our master Trahy hanged, but he will repent it." And, "at the voice of this madman, there hurried up vine dressers, boatmen, and marchands d'eau (costermongers), a whole angry mob, who were for having Amyot's throat cut and Trahy made bishop in his stead." Whilst the blind passions of fanatics and demagogues were thus let loose, the sensible and clear sighted spirits, the earnest and moderate royalists, did not all of them remain silent and motionless. After the appearance of the letters written in 1588 by the Duke of Guise to explain and justify his conduct in this crisis, a grandson of Chancellor de l'Hospital, Michael Hureau, Sieur du Fay, published a document entitled Frank and Free Discourse upon the Condition of France, one of the most judicious and most eloquent pamphlets of the 16th century, a profound criticism upon the acts of the Duke of Guise, their causes and consequences, and a true picture of the falsehoods and servitude into which an eminent man may fall when he makes himself the tool of a popular faction in the hope of making that faction the tool of his personal ambition. But even the men who were sufficiently enlightened and sufficiently courageous to tell the League and its leader plain truths spoke only rather late in the day, and at first without giving their names. The document written by L'Hospital's grandson did not appear until 1591, after the death of Henry III. And Henry de Guise, and it remained anonymous for some time. One cannot be astonished at such timidity. Guise himself was timid before the Leaguers, and he always ended by yielding to them in essentials, after having attempted to resist them upon such and such an incidental point. His own people accused him of lacking boldness, and his sister, the Duchess of Montpensier, openly patronized the most violent preachers, whilst boasting that she wielded more influence through them than her brother by his armies. Henry III., under stress of his enemies' zeal and his own servants' weakness, Catherine de' Medici included, after having fled from Paris and taken refuge at Chartres to escape the triumph of the barricades, once more began to negotiate, that is, to capitulate, with the League. He issued at Rouen, on the 19th of July, 1588, an edict in 11 articles, whereby he granted more than had been demanded, and more than he had promised in 1585 by the treaty of Nemours. Over and above the measures contained in that treaty against the Huguenots, in respect of the present and the future, he added 4 fresh surety towns, amongst others Bourges and Orleans, to those of which the Leaguers were to remain in possession. He declared, moreover, "that no investigation should be made into any understandings, associations, and other matters into which our Catholic subjects might have entered together, inasmuch as they have given us to understand, and have informed us, that what they did was but owing to the zeal they felt for the preservation and maintenance of the Catholic religion." By thus releasing the League from all responsibility for the past, and by giving this new treaty the name of Edict of Union, Henry III. flattered himself, it is said, that he was thus putting himself at the head of a new grand Catholic League, which would become royalist again, inasmuch as the king was granting it all it had desired. The Edict of Union was enregistered at the Parliament of Paris on the 21st of July. The States General were convoked for the 15th of October following. "On Tuesday, August 2, his Majesty," says L'Estoile, "being entertained by the Duke of Guise during his dinner, asked him for drink, and then said to him, 'To whom shall we drink?' 'To whom you please, sir,' answered the duke. 'It is for your Majesty to command.' 'Cousin,' said the king, 'drink we to our good friends the Huguenots.' 'It is well said, sir,' answered the duke. 'And to our good barricaders,' said the king, 'let us not forget them.' Whereupon the duke began to laugh a little, says L'Estoile, but a sort of laugh that did not go beyond the knot of the throat, being dissatisfied at the novel union the king was pleased to make of the Huguenots with the barricaders." What must have, to some extent, reassured the Duke of Guise was that a Te Deum was celebrated at Notre Dame for the King of Navarre's exclusion from all right to the crown, and that on the 14th of August Henry de Guise was appointed generalissimo of the royal armies. The States General met at Blois on the 16th of October, 1588. They numbered 505 deputies, 191 of the third estate, 180 of the noblesse, 134 of the clergy. The king had given orders "to conduct each deputy as they arrived to his cabinet, that he might see, hear, and know them all personally." When the 505 deputies had taken their places in the hall, the Duke of Guise went to fetch the king, who made his entry attended by the princes of the blood, and opened the session with the dignity and easy grace which all the Valois seem to have inherited from Francis I. The Duke of Guise, in a coat of white satin, was seated at the king's feet, as high steward of his household, scanning the whole assembly with his piercing glance, as if to keep watch over those who were in his service. "He seemed," says a contemporary, "by a single flash of his eye to fortify them in the hope of the advancement of his designs. his fortunes and his greatness, and to say to them, without speaking, 'I see you.'" The king's speech was long, able, well delivered, and very much applauded, save by Guise himself and his particular friends. The firmness of tone had displeased them, and one sentence excited in them a discontent which they had found difficulty in restraining. "Certain grandees of my kingdom have formed such leagues and associations as, in every well ordered monarchy, are crimes of high treason, without the sovereign's permission. But, showing my wonted indulgence, I am quite willing to let bygones be bygones in this respect." Guise grew pale at these words. On leaving the royal session, he got his private committee to decide that the Cardinal of Guise and the Archbishop of Lyons should go to see the king, and beg him to abandon the printing of his speech, and meanwhile Guise himself sent to the printers to stop the immediate publication. Discussion took place next day in the king's cabinet, and a threat was held out to him that a portion of the deputies would quit the meeting of states. The queen mother advised her son to compromise. The king yielded, according to his custom, and gave authority for cutting out the strongest expressions, amongst others those just quoted. "The correction was accordingly made," says M. Picot, the latest and most able historian of the states general; "and Henry III. had to add this new insult to all that were rankling at the bottom of his heart since the affair of the barricades." This was, for the Duke of Guise, a first trial of his power, and great was his satisfaction at this first success. On leaving the opening session of the states general, he wrote to the Spanish ambassador Mendoza, "I handled our states so well that I made them resolve to require confirmation of the Edict of Union (of July 21 preceding) as fundamental law of the state. The king refused to do so, in rather sharp terms, to the deputies who brought the representation before him, and from that it is presumed that he inclines towards a peace with the heretics. But at last he was so pressed by the states, the which were otherwise on the point of breaking up, that he promised to swear the edict and have it sworn before entering upon consideration of any matter." The next day but one, in fact on the 18th of October, at the second session of the states general, "the edict of July 21 was read and published with the greatest solemnity. The king swore to maintain it in terms calculated to dissipate all anxieties on the part of the Catholics. The deputies swore after him. The Archbishop of Bourges delivered an address on the sanctity of oaths, and those present began to think the session over, when the king rose a second time to recommend the deputies not to leave Blois before the papers were drawn up and the ordinances made. He reminded them that at the last assembly of the states the suggestions and counsels of the three estates had been so ill carried out that, instead of a reformation and an establishment of good laws, everything had been thrown into confusion. Accordingly, the king added to this suggestion a solemn oath that he would not budge from the city until he had made an edict, sacred and inviolable. The enthusiasm of the deputies was at its height. A rush took place to the church of St. Sauveur to chant a Te Deum. All the princes were there to give thanks to God. Never were king, court, and people so joyous." The Duke of Guise wrote to the Spanish ambassador, "At length we have, in full assembly of the states, had our edict of union solemnly sworn and established as fundamental law of this realm, having surmounted all the difficulties and hindrances which the king was pleased to throw in the way. I found myself 4 or 5 times on the point of rupture, but I was verily assisted by so many good men." After, as well as before the opening of the states general, the friends of the Duke of Guise were far from having, all of them, the same confidence that he had in his position and in his success. "Stupid owl of a Lorrainer," said Sieur de Vins, commanding, on behalf of the League in Dauphiny, on reading the duke's despatches, "has he so little sense as to believe that a king whose crown he, by dissimulating, has been wanting to take away, is not dissimulating in turn to take away his life?" "As they are so thick together," said M. de Vins's sister, when she knew that the Duke of Guise was at Blois with the king, "you will hear, at the very first opportunity, that one or the other has killed his fellow." Guise himself was no stranger to this idea. "We are not without warnings from all quarters that there is a design of attempting my life," he wrote on the 21st of September, 1588; "but I have, thank God, so provided against it, both by the gathering I have made of a good number of my friends, and in having, by presents and money, secured a portion of those whose services are relied upon for the execution of it, that if once things begin I shall finish more roughly than I did at Paris." After the opening of the states general and the success he obtained thereat, Guise appeared, if not more anxious, at any rate more attentive to the warnings he received. On the 10th of December, 1588, he wrote to Commander Moreo, confidential agent from the King of Spain, to him, "You cannot imagine what alarms have been given me since your departure. I have so well provided against them that my enemies have not seen their way to attempting anything. But expenses have grown upon me to such an extent that I have great need of your prompt assistance. I have now so much credit with this assembly that I have hitherto made it dance to my tune, and I hope that as to what remains to be decreed I shall be quite able to maintain the same authority." Some of his partisans advised him to go away for a while to Orleans; but he absolutely refused, repeating, with the Archbishop of Lyons, "He who leaves the game loses it." One evening, in a little circle of intimates, on the 21st of December, a question arose whether it would not be advisable to prevent the king's designs by striking at his person. The Cardinal of Guise begged his brother to go away, assuring him that his own presence would suffice for the direction of affairs, but, "They are in such case, my friend," said de Balafre, "that if I saw death coming in at the window, I would not consent to go out by the door to avoid it." His cousin, the Duke of Elbeuf, paid him a visit at night to urge him to withdraw himself from the plot hatched against him. "If it were necessary to lose my life in order to reap the proximate fruits of the state's good resolution," said Guise, "that is quite what I have made up my mind to. Though I had 100 lives, I would devote them all to the service of God and his church, and to the relief of the poor people for whom I feel the greatest pity." Then, touching the Duke of Elbeuf upon the shoulder, he said, "Go to bed, cousin;" and, taking away his hand and laying it upon his own heart, he added, "Here is the doublet of innocence." On the evening of the 22d of December, 1588, when Charlotte de Semblancay, Marchioness of Noirmoutier, to whom he was tenderly attached, pressed him to depart, or, at any rate, not to be present at the council next day, the only answer he made her was to hum the following ditty by Desportes, a poet of the day: "My little rose, a little spell Of absence changed that heart of thine; And I, who know the change full well, Have found another place for mine. No more such fair but fickle she Shall find me her obedient; And flighty shepherdess, we'll see Which of the twain will first repent." Henry III. was scarcely less disturbed, but in quite a different way, than the Duke of Guise. For a long time past he had been thinking about getting rid of the latter, just as he had thought for a long time, 20 years before, about getting rid of Admiral de Coligny. But since the date of his escape from the popular rising on the day of the barricades, he had hoped that, thanks to the adoption of the Edict of Union and to the convocation of the states general, he would escape the yoke of the Duke of Guise. He saw every day that he had been mistaken. The League, and consequently the Duke of Guise, had more power than he with the states general. In vain had the king changed nearly all his ministers. In vain had he removed his principal favorite, the Duke of Epernon, from the government of Normandy to that of Provence. He did not obtain from the states general what he demanded, that is, the money he wanted; and the states required of him administrative reforms, sound enough at bottom, but suggested by the Duke of Guise with an interested object, and calculated to shackle the kingly authority even more than could be done by Guise himself directly. At the same time that Guise was urging on the states general in this path, he demanded to be made constable, not by the king any longer, but by the states themselves. The kingship was thus being squeezed between the haughty supremacy of the great lords, substitutes for the feudal regimen, and the first essays of that free government which is nowadays called the parliamentary regimen. Henry III. determined with fear and trembling to disembarrass himself of his two rivals, of the Duke of Guise by assassination, and of the states general by packing them off home. He did not know how intimately the two great questions of which the sixteenth century was the great cradle, the question of religious liberty and that of political liberty, were connected one with the other, and would be prosecuted jointly or successively in the natural progress of Christian civilization, or through what trials kings and people would have to pass before succeeding in any effectual solution of them. Section 51.